Hey everyone. Today's story is about a man who suddenly gets ice skate, along with his entire house and his beloved dog. In a new world full of monsters, he chooses farming, cooking, and a peaceful, slow life instead. Let's begin. The magic stone flew through the air. It resembled a crystal. It glowed brightly, illuminating the surroundings. It was an anomaly. Five guys dressed in hooded sweatshirts and robes were looking at this crystal. Their faces were surprised, preoccupied with something not very pleasant. One of the guys said cautiously that their world and another had merged, for the first time in 13 years. The action took place in a strange room with no windows, filled with shelves and bookcases. It looked like an old library. Another man, with a mustache, informed everyone that a crack had formed between the boundaries of the worlds. But a new era was beginning. A boy named Sway sat at a computer, clicking the mouse. Next to him stood his father, Kazutru, wearing a shirt and glasses. They stared intently at the computer screen and waited. Important information from the university appeared on the screen. It was an admission notification. Congratulations on passing the exam appeared on the screen. And below the notification of successful completion of the exam, they could find the necessary documents for admission. The boy Sway stood up from the table and raised his hands cheerfully. He shouted joyfully and exclaimed with a smile on his face. His father stood nearby and kindly said that his studies had paid off. He congratulated Sway, and the boy thanked his father. The man happily suggested celebrating tomorrow and eating well. Sway did not resist the suggestion, and his father left. After a while, Sway stood in his room and thought. He realized that now his father would calm down thanks to his admission. Sway would study hard, work hard, and then, suddenly, he received a call. Sway thought it was his father calling, but it wasn't. The screen showed an incoming call from the hospital. The boy immediately realized that something was wrong and picked up the phone. The voice asked if he was Hitano Kazutoru's son. Sway replied that he was. He was told that something had happened to his father. They were sorry to have to tell him, but his father had died. It was an accident. Sway froze and couldn't say a word. It was as if he had lost touch with the world. The hospital told the boy that his father had had a terrible accident on his way home. He had been walking on the sidewalk when he was hit by a motorcycle. The boy hung up in shock. His mother ran away, leaving him behind. That was all he had heard about her. His father had promised to tell Sway more about his mother when he grew up. The man assured him that his mother loved them both. She didn't live with them not because she had abandoned them. His father explained to his son that she had no choice, but she was still a member of their Hitano family. The boy's father asked him to always remember that. Sway says that his father raised him alone. The man tried to compensate for his mother's love as best he could by showering him with his own love. Sway may have been lonely at times, but the man was a very good father. And so, upon hearing of his death, Sway was so saddened and shocked that he couldn't even put it into words. He was melting away before our eyes. Sway went outside to his dog, named Chocola. He was very sad and needed to be alone to calm down to recover from the shocking news. He poured food into Chocola's bowl so that she could eat. The boy sat down next to the dog and asked if it was tasty. The dog barked happily. Chocola was the third member of their family. Sway had been with her since childhood. She was an old dog, some kind of Siberian husky. The boy hugged Chocola and realized how good it was to have her nearby. Sway admits that, to be honest, he doesn't think about his mother at all, although he is worried that he cannot tell her about his father's death, and he knows nothing about his mother. He went to the home library and began rummaging through the books. All the shelves and cabinets were completely filled with books of all kinds. But in one of the books, Sway found a suspicious envelope and picked it up. The boy immediately thought that the envelope contained confirmation of land rights and a key. But then he realized that the inheritance transfer procedure had already been completed. He opened the envelope and took out a note. The note was written in his father's handwriting. It said that the next general cleaning would be in March. Sway didn't understand what general cleaning meant and was surprised. The boy inherited land in the same prefecture, far from here. He had to take a train, then a bus, and after several hours, he would arrive at his home far away in the mountains. Sway looked at the note and was surprised that he still remembered it. Sway realized that he had to go to this house. He didn't know why, but he was sure that his father wanted to tell him something. Sway got ready, went outside, and took Chocola with him. Now they would walk. The boy said that it would take them an hour to walk there with the dog, so they had to hurry. Chocola ran happily ahead of the boy and barked. Sway noticed that the dog was lively today. The dog barked. Chocola was an old dog who had been with Sway throughout his childhood. Chocola was now about 13 years old. The two of them walked along the sidewalk, leaving the yard behind. Sway didn't want to think about it, but with age, all creatures become like that. His smart and kind Chocola. When his father died, the dog noticed how sad Sway was. And, as usual, after emptying his bowl, he snuggled up to the boy, as if trying to cheer him up. Chocola was his last family, and Sway wanted them both to be happy. The boy led his dog by the collar and told him that they would now be together for a long time. The dog barked questioningly. Sway held his phone with the maps open in his hands. The boy and the dog walked past streets, trees, and parks, past mountains, hills, and highlands. They passed other houses and buildings and went deep into the forest. They followed the maps. Then, after a while, Sway noticed that they had gone quite far. He became frightened. What if a bear attacked them in the forest? Chocola barked. Sway laughed at this and asked if the dog would protect him. The boy realized that there was cell service in this area, so they would definitely get help if anything happened. And they continued walking along the forest path. 2 hours later, the boy noticed that the maps on his phone were wrong. It didn't say they had to go up the mountain. But Sway and Chocola started climbing. The boy said that Chocola was walking very briskly. And finally, they arrived. In front of them was a large, tall house with wide windows, very modern and expensive in design. There was a porch and a few steps in front of the entrance. Around it were flowering bushes and trees, vegetable gardens, and a small fence. Sway looked at the house with wide, surprised eyes and noticed that the building resembled a typical European-style house. They slowly walked past the garden with its flower beds, looking at everything around them, and they came to a large garage. Sway did not expect to see a garage there. He said they could deal with the garage later. The dog barked cheerfully in response. Sway noticed that Chocola was very smart, as if he really understood him, and he smiled at that. The boy carefully crouched down and leaned toward Chocola. He told the dog that he was going to go and look around the house and ordered him to sit there and not go anywhere. The dog sat quietly in front of him and barked trustingly. Sway stood up and started to leave, turning back to the dog and asking him not to leave the garden. Chocola barked again, understanding everything. Sway took the key from his pocket and inserted it into the keyhole. To the boy's surprise, the key fit perfectly. Sway carefully turned the key in the lock. But suddenly, the boy was struck by an electric shock. He was frightened by this unexpected electric shock, which ran through the door and the key. His eyes immediately widened with fear and surprise. The boy couldn't understand what kind of electric shock had come from the key. Chocola immediately came running at his cries, barking loudly and viciously. The dog sensed danger near his master. Sway turned to Chocola and was surprised that he understood and sensed the danger immediately. They stood together in front of the big house and tried to figure out what was going on. Sway explained that he just wanted to open the door, but didn't understand what had just happened. Chocola began barking loudly again. Sway calmed the dog down and said that everything was fine, that nothing bad had happened. He patted the dog on the head. The boy said he didn't feel anything unusual. On the contrary, he noticed that he felt more energetic. His fatigue was gone, and his backpack felt lighter. He apologized to Chocola for disturbing her. The dog looked at him trustingly. Chocola's gaze showed that she trusted her owner and was not going to leave his side now. Sway saw this and told the dog that he would take her home with him. Chocola barked approvingly. And so, they tried to open the door again, and this time they succeeded. The boy and the dog entered the house and found themselves in a large hallway. Sway noticed that the house was completely ordinary, and there was nothing unusual inside. The house wasn't even particularly dirty. The walls were painted in light, pleasant colors, and the atmosphere in the rooms didn't feel dangerous. There were vases everywhere, large, spacious wardrobes. Everything was clean and tidy bright. In front of the entrance, Sway began to wipe the dog's paws with a rag so that it could also go further. The boy told Chocola that, in his opinion, this was also okay, and he stood up. Sway discovered an open room next to them. The boy was immediately interested and went inside, but he was very surprised by what he saw inside. In front of the boy was a large sofa with pillows, a wooden table with 4 matching wooden chairs, light-colored walls, and a spacious window. Sway suddenly realized that it all seemed very familiar to him. This layout, this furniture, and this atmosphere. It was as if he had been here before. But Sway couldn't understand when he could have been here, or even when he could have lived here. It seemed he had forgotten. Sway thought that he must have been a child at the time, but he was sure that couldn't be the case. And yet, the thought occurred to Sway that nothing had changed since long ago, and multiple memories from his childhood began to surface. A crack in the kitchen cabinet, dirt on the wall, the L-shaped sofa. His father sat on the short part. The curtains on the veranda, which Sway often played with. The boy couldn't remember right away, but he loved to play in the garden. Chocola was still small back then. He used to chase after Sway, and his young parents watched them. Suddenly, Sway's stream of thoughts and nostalgia was interrupted by Chocola's sharp, loud, and angry bark. The boy immediately rushed over. Chocola saw the approaching danger. The boy ran over and saw a scary creature in the garden at the doorstep of the house. He fell to the floor and crawled to the wall, away from the danger. Sway's face was very frightened and alarmed by what he saw. He did not understand what was happening or where the dragon had come from. It was a dragon from European myths, or Chinese ones. Sui tried to figure it out himself, but he didn't know. Perhaps it was a wyvern. But Sui was convinced that it was definitely something from a game or anime. At that moment, the dragon growled, glared at the boy and the dog, flapped its wings, was large and looked very dangerous and enraged. Fear was written all over Sui's face. He thought it was all some kind of joke and that it couldn't be real. He thought someone was just playing a prank on him. But no, Sui realized that this creature was too real. It wasn't just some costume. The boy wondered if maybe someone had put a virtual reality helmet on him. He and Chocola sat on the steps of the porch and were terrified. The dragon stood menacingly in front of them. Sui thought about calling the police, but he didn't think about what would happen next. And would the police even be able to deal with this monster? The boy realized that this was no time to get distracted. He calmed himself and Chocola down. Meanwhile, the dragon made terrifying, growling sounds. It was clearly vicious and furious. It opened its mouth wide, revealing sharp, long teeth, and flapped its powerful wings. Sui clung to Chocola in fear. The boy had the idea to run back home, but for some reason his body wouldn't obey him. Suddenly, the dragon flew up into the air very high. Sui became frightened. He realized that the creature was flying rapidly and viciously straight at him. The boy shielded Chocola with his body so that he would not be hurt. Sui apologized plaintively to the dog because he had only recently told him that they would be together for a long time. But the boy would not have time to hide from the attack of the evil dragon flying towards him. He closed his eyes in fear and prepared for the worst. The dragon was getting closer and closer to the house. But suddenly it flew back sharply without touching the boy and the dog. They looked in fear at the stunned dragon, which could not approach them. At first, Sui didn't understand what was happening. The dragon made strange sounds of defeat and growled. Chocola just supported his master and barked in response. Sui guessed that the creature had been damaged. It turned out that the house had magical protection. It turned out that there was some kind of protection around the house. Sui thought about it and made a decision. He said that since that was the case, he and Chocola needed to run into the house and hide. But Chocola didn't listen. He rushed toward the dragon. The boy was very afraid for his dog. Sui started calling Chocola back. He shouted that he was running in the wrong direction, asked him to stop, and said that the dog couldn't defeat this monster. But the dog kept running. Sui cried out loyally that Chocola was old, lively, but old, and had always protected him. And now the boy had to protect the dog. When Sui failed his tests, when he quarreled with his friends, when his father died, when the boy was sad, Chocola always noticed and came to him. Yes, and when his loved ones died, the dog cheered him up. And with these thoughts, the boy ran after Chocola, waving his arms, trying to stop him, shouting. But the dog suddenly flew into the air straight toward the dragon's head. Sui watched this spectacle with eyes full of fear and anxiety. The monster opened its mouth and growled at the dog, but immediately its head and neck broke off, and the upper part of the dragon fell to the ground. Its spine was broken, and the monster no longer moved. Chocola landed on the ground and barked happily at his owner. Sui ran up to it and was shocked. They sat down on the ground in the yard. The boy cried at what he saw and was glad to see the dog safe and sound. They hugged each other. Sui wondered if the dog had really done that. He asked if the dog was hurt anywhere. Chocola barked approvingly. Sui was moved and said he was very happy. He felt relieved after being saved from the monster and grateful to Chocola for saving him. And most importantly, an inexplicable joy that his family was safe. Sui cried loudly like a little child. Meanwhile, the State Royal Magic Academy, an institute for studying the phenomenon of cracks between the boundaries of worlds. Several people in suits and robes continued to stand and examine the magic stone. They realized that these worlds had merged, their world and another. For the first time in 13 years, a crack had formed between the boundaries of the worlds. A girl in a magic hat and suit stood in this building nearby. She thought of Sui, and she said that they would definitely meet. He just had to wait for her. A magic crystal floats in the air. An elderly man with a mustache and a robe looks at this crystal and announces that for the first time in 13 years, a crack has formed between the boundaries of the worlds. Near him stand several young men, also in robes, who look like students of this academy. One of them happily remarks that they have finally found a door to another world. But it leads to a world of filth controlled by monsters, where no human has ever set foot. The time has come. The action takes place in the forest of emptiness. Another guy said that adventurer guilds and even the royal army would not be able to survive in this place, and that only a few people on the continent are capable of getting there. The smiles on their faces disappeared, but the guy continued and anxiously said that they couldn't just leave it at that. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. A woman's voice asked if she could come in. It was the director of the institute, Mrs. Viole. The man with the mustache invited her in. Ms. Viol informed him that she and Karen would be going to the Forest of Emptiness. Karen was a girl who worked near the forest, and Viol would contact her and set off. The man replied that Karen was a special advisor to the king and was slightly surprised. Viol said that she would gather equipment and a team at the southern edge of the Forest of Emptiness, in the village of Sidera. She entrusted the rest to them. The girl turned importantly and quickly left the room. The man bowed at her feet and obediently said that they would obey her. The other students and young people present also repeated the man's words and bowed to Lady Viol. She was already on her way out. Thoughts came to the man's mind. The incomparable witch of the heavenly bell, the deer slayer, Lady Viol, and the child of the elves, the witch of the spring wind, Lady Karen. The man raised his head. He thought about these two witches and realized that he was sure the girls would succeed. Meanwhile, the boy and the dog were still near the house. Not far from the house, in a clearing, unusual mushrooms were growing. On their caps had strange growths like additional legs with spots. Sway was amazed by everything that was happening and what he saw at that moment. A dead dragon lay before them, its severed head lying nearby, bleeding profusely. The lifeless, enormous body made no sound and showed no movement. It was as if the world had frozen. Everything was different there. The boy picked up his phone to check the time, but the screen displayed midnight, exactly midnight. Although it was broad daylight outside and the sun was shining brightly, Sway did not expect any of this, and he realized that yes, they were definitely in another world. The boy believes that he and Chocola have been transported to another world. Sway had read about this, and his classmates had advised him to do so. Suddenly, Sway exclaimed that it was all fiction. The dog sat down next to him, not understanding why his owner was so active. And the boy sank into thought. Well, if you look at it that way, they teleported to another world along with the house, which, no matter how you look at it, is very convenient. In any case, the boy understands that he and Chocola should be very careful. He rubbed his hands together nervously, not knowing what to think. And he turned to Chocola. Sway doesn't know where the dog got such strength or where the house got its barrier, but he'll chalk it all up to the power of another world. Memories suddenly flashed through Sway's mind of how, just a few minutes ago, his faithful dog had managed to stop a huge dragon and how they had been saved by the magical, unknown protection on the house. Chocola just barked happily in response, approving of every word his master said, and they began to examine the house properly. And they entered it. They walked up the stairs, past the bright kitchen set, cabinets and drawers, shelves. They entered one of the rooms. Sway approached the curtains, touched them, but was lost in his thoughts. The boy wondered if this might not be the last dragon to attack them, and he didn't even know how they would deal with it. Chocola sat nearby. Sway's face turned pale, but the boy was not going to give up and tremble with fear. The dog yelped happily in response. Sway walked over to the light switch and flicked it, but he noticed that there was no electricity in the room. The boy mysteriously approached the faucets, walls, touched the shelves, examined the furniture, and thought. Before leaving, Sway learned that the bills for this house had not been paid. He was about to turn on the faucet in the bathroom and thought that there was no water there either. But when he turned on the faucet, the boy saw a steady stream of hot water. He was very surprised and opened his mouth. Hot water is flowing, but, in Sway's opinion, it would be scary to drink such water. But it's good that there is at least something. If only there was electricity in this house. He went to the kitchen. Seeing the wall cabinets, he quickly decided to open them and see what was inside. And there was a whole cupboard full of food. Sway immediately thought that his father was a genius, and he was the son of a genius. Sway's mood immediately improved. He looked at the expiration dates on the products and noticed that they were very long. And with a lighter in their hands, they would definitely come up with something. Sway saw that there were even treats for Chocola in this kitchen. He believed they could definitely last a month here. The dog barked back at him. They became curious about what was on the second floor and went up the stairs. Sway entered the second floor and saw many rooms in front of him. He pulled the handle of one of the doors there. He entered the storage room. There were countless boxes and crates in the storage room. Sway entered the next room. It turned out to be a bedroom. The boy saw a large, comfortable bed covered with a blanket in front of him. He was immediately delighted because he realized that now they had a place to sleep. And then, Sway wanted to enter the third room, but it turned out to be locked. And the boy decided to leave it for later. Entering the fourth and last room, the boy found himself in a study. There were shelves and cabinets with books all around, like in a library. And opposite the window was a large, spacious table with a desk lamp. Sway approached it. He noticed that it seemed like there used to be electricity there. There were also lamps in the other rooms. There were many books on the shelves. Sway looked at them and was puzzled. He wondered what his father was interested in. Was he going to a deserted island? He found it very strange. Suddenly, among the other books, the boy stumbled upon a mysterious album. He picked it up carefully. He opened it, and saw that the album began with Sway's graduation from elementary school. There were many photographs stuck on it, depicting members of the boy's family. In one photo, he was in middle school. In another, he was in high school. And all of them were recent. Sway was surprised that there were so many photos. He wondered when his father had found the time to take so many pictures. That's right. Sway remembered that his father was always taking pictures of something. The boy thought they were just photos of food, and they never had any albums at home. So where did this one come from? Sway didn't understand. Then he and Chocola went out into the yard and approached the garden beds. Sway sat down next to the beds and noticed that the garden was very well maintained. It seemed that his father had been working on it for some time. There was a small well nearby. The boy realized that the well could also be used because it was in working order. There was a boiler behind the house, but it needed electricity to work. The boy thought that since there was a well, he could take a bath. But definitely not now. Chocola barked, and so they moved on. Sway hoped that maybe they could find something in the warehouse. The boy wanted to open the door, but it was locked too. They sat down with the dog and felt sad. But Sway was sure they would come up with something. There was a latch near the window at the entrance to the warehouse that had to be opened to get in. But it was locked, and to open it, they probably needed a key, which they didn't have. Then Sway had the idea to break the window. He was about to use force, but suddenly Chocola grabbed his sleeve and stopped him, barking suspiciously. Sway realized it was better to stop. The dog sank his teeth into the locked latch, and in an instant, he tore it off. The boy was very frightened. He immediately bent down to the dog and began frantically examining its teeth, checking them for integrity after such a maneuver. But Chocola's fangs were intact and unharmed. Sway took Chocola by the cheeks and exclaimed joyfully that the dog was fine after the fight with the dragon. Well, the boy thought that after that blow, this dog could no longer be considered an ordinary dog. Chocola just looked trustingly at his owner. The boy looked at the dog and wanted to know what had been going on with him lately. Had his cheater abilities awakened? Suddenly, it dawned on Sway. A thought came to him. What if he had awakened such abilities too? The boy stood up abruptly and touched his hands. He decided to test it out. Sway shouted the spell for a fireball to appear and held out his palm. But nothing happened. The boy didn't expect his abilities to manifest. He knew nothing would happen. After that, he called Chocola to explore the warehouse. After all, thanks to the dog, they could now enter it. Inside the warehouse, there were so many boxes, crates, various equipment, and tools that the boy's eyes darted around. Sway was grateful to his father for keeping everything for the house and farm in this warehouse. And if they planted the fields, the food problem would be solved. Sway saw a portable stove and immediately realized that he could cook kebabs. And nearby lay a gasoline-powered generator. True, the boy realized that if the gasoline ran out, the battery would be of little use. But at least he was reassured that they now had electricity for a rainy day. A smile lit up Sway's face. But suddenly it dawned on him again. He wondered why there were so many useful things in this warehouse. The boy thought that the three of them had once lived here. Or had his father foreseen that something would happen to him? Sway didn't understand anything. He put his hands on his head, and next to him, he saw a tool. It was big and black. He pulled the tool out of its packaging with his hand, and he realized that it was actually a magic sword. Outside, the boy saw a strange moon. It looked like Saturn, with the same rings, large and bright. But the sky was still light, and night was not far off. Sway decided to keep this magic sword for defense. Maybe another monster would attack. The sword looked sturdy, but was as light as a feather. The boy thought that this was what the other world was like. They had no electricity, so Sway and Chocola began to eat before it got dark. They went to the kitchen, and Sway sat down at the table. Chocola ran around him. The boy told the dog that it was good he had brought food with him. Chocola's bowl was already filled with food from the kitchen shelf of this house. Sway placed a container of delicious homemade food from his house in front of him. Speaking of dinners, the boy said that his refrigerator at home was full of food to be reheated. After his father's death, Sway had no strength to cook. But he should have. Cooking always made his father happy. But to do that, he needed to find ingredients. Meanwhile, Chocola barked happily and ate. Night fell, and bright stars appeared outside the window. Sway and Chocola went to bed. They lay together on the large bed in the bedroom. The boy thought about his future plans in this house. Now he needed to plow the beds and grow vegetables. He also needed to study the power of the barrier that protected them from dragons, and then look for food around the forest. Sway hoped to find a human village beyond the forest. And then bad, disturbing thoughts began to creep into his head. The boy jumped up from the bed in fright and cried out. What if the villagers spoke a different language? What if they encountered bad people? What if there were no more people in this world at all? Chocola was also afraid for his master and jumped on him lightly so that Sway would stop worrying so much for no reason. The boy smiled and realized he had been worrying for nothing. In fact, Sway decided to thank Chocola for being there for him. The boy was glad that they were together. On such a dark night in another world, Chocola's warmth gave Sway peace. The boy wished Chocola good night. The dog barked kindly in response, and they lay down next to each other and fell asleep. Morning came. Sway and Chocola stumbled out of the bedroom, half asleep, and went downstairs to the bathroom. The boy brushed his teeth and washed his face. Then they went to have breakfast. Sway ate some canned food from the cupboard and fed the dog. After that, they went out to explore. When they got to the yard, Sway noticed something very strange. The corpse of the dragon that Chocola had defeated yesterday had disappeared. At the same time, in the northeastern land of Gregorum, in the middle of the Forest of Emptiness, special advisor to the Royal Academy of Magic, an institute for studying the phenomenon of cracks between worlds, Karen. This young girl in a robe made her way through the thick forest with quick, careful steps. A day ago, she received a message from Lady Viole through a crystal. Still, Karen reports that she is bored with studying the local soil. It's good that the crack appeared nearby, but right in the Forest of Emptiness. And deep inside it at that, she was in a deserted land of filth, where no human foot had ever trod. The desert forest was a place where the most dangerous mutants roamed in the depths. Mutants are monsters with a special form and power, capable of paranormally rapid evolution. They say it's all due to the influence of the occasionally appearing magic crucible, the emergence of which is attributed to several conditions, such as the right terrain, soil, climate, and temperature. In the dangerous depths of the Forest of Emptiness, the magic crucible appears often and remains for a long time. The Forest of Emptiness is feared. It is called the frozen prisoner of divine will. Even among those called witches, only a few are able to survive in this forest. Karen moved through the forest tensely and carefully. She had waited 13 years for this, and she would not let the mutants stop her. Karen thought about her uncle, Chocola, and Sway. She recalled moments from her distant childhood. Sway once told her that she had very shiny hair. The boy had black hair. Karen remembered this, and a thought came to her mind. Black hair was common in their world, but in Karen's world, it was considered rare. Sway's hair and eyes were as black as pitch. In Karen's world, that meant a lot, and that's why they had to part ways 13 years ago. Karen believes that Sway is incredibly strong, but at that time, he couldn't control his abilities. So much so that he unconsciously closed the gate when he felt his life was in danger. But that was 13 years ago. Suddenly, Karen's nostalgia was interrupted by a large earth spider, huge in size, standing behind her in the thicket of the forest. But the girl simply and calmly told it not to bother her. Karen used the magic of the fog blade and made the earth spider dissolve into the flow of time. The earth spider was instantly killed with a crash. It fell to the ground dead. Karen noticed that she was still far from her goal and needed to hurry. Using the global magical positioning system that Kazuduru had shown her, she was going to get to the boy, and she was sure of it. The girl put her hand on her heart. Meanwhile, Sway understood that even if he and Chocola had ended up in another world, there must be an explanation for everything. They stood at the site of yesterday's dragon's death and tried to figure out where it could have disappeared to. And what were those tracks on ground? The tracks looked like they were made by someone's large, sharp claws. They led towards the forest. The boy guessed that the corpse had not disappeared. Someone had dragged it away during the night. Suddenly, Chocola moved closer to the forest and barked loudly. Sway immediately realized that something was wrong and asked the dog what had happened. Why was it barking? It turned out that the dog had seen the severed head of the dragon lying there. It had simply moved, and the dog had sensed it and shown it to his master. Sway was very surprised. Could it be that only the huge dragon carcass had been taken away? Sway wondered. A human? But if it were a rational creature, it would be more interested in the house than the corpse. The boy assumed so. Whoever took the carcass must have been strong enough to do so. He believed that it was definitely done by an irrational creature. And, judging by the bloodstains, it was alone. If he didn't understand Sway, there would be trouble. And the boy had the idea to bury the head, because the smell of blood could attract other monsters. Chocola barked approvingly at his master and sat nearby. Sway took a shovel from the warehouse and, after a while, successfully buried the bloodied head of the dead dragon. But then the boy noticed that he seemed to have changed somehow too. When he opened the door to the hallway, his body felt so light. Now, the backpack, the sword, and the shovel in his hands, everything in general, did not seem as heavy to Sway as before. Even now, after digging up so much earth, Sway did not feel tired. The boy began to ponder again. Maybe he had awakened the power. After all, just like Chocola, he realized he had to try. He had nothing to lose. And he took his sword, which he had found yesterday in the warehouse, out of its sheath. Sway felt the sword was very light, like a feather, like air. He gripped it tightly with both hands and swung it through the air. The steel glinted in the sun. He decided to chop off a branch on the tree in front of him. The boy jumped into the air and swung the sword. He struck the branch with shouts and determination. He landed and shouted that he knew it. He turned to Chocola with joyful exclamations that he had also become stronger. The dog barked questioningly. Maybe, as Sway thinks, he can even strike with full force, like Chocola did yesterday. But the boy is still afraid to do so. He suggested that Chocola find a lawn and try there. The dog barked happily and stood up on its hind legs with joy. Sway cheerfully patted his dog on the head and noticed that the dog hadn't had a good walk in a long time. Because the forest is dangerous and you can't really walk around the house. Chocola was very happy. But suddenly he saw something strange nearby. Sway thought the dog had stepped on something. He became concerned and asked about it. But Chocola saw the large paw of some kind of predator nearby. It was something that looked like a bear. The predator wanted to climb over the high fence into Sway's yard. It was a very ferocious and, apparently, hungry beast. Sweepanicht. He noticed that this beast looked like a normal bear, but its tail was like a scorpion's. And crystals were growing out of its back. And horns grow out of its head, just like a mountain goat. The boy was very afraid that this bear would attack them. And Chocola barked at it with a vicious bark. Sway thought about it and became curious. If it's not a bear, then what is it? A fake bear. That's it. The boy understood and decided to call this predator a fake bear. Chocola barked again, this time in response to his owner. The fake bear's mouth was huge. Long, sharp fangs, like sabers, protruded from it, and saliva dripped from its mouth. The predator's gaze was fierce and hungry, but Sway looked at it resolutely. Suddenly, the false bear growled loudly and fiercely, waved its front paws, and stood up on its hind legs. It wanted to climb over the fence with its front paws and get right into the garden to the boy and the dog. Loud rustling and frightening sounds echoed throughout the neighborhood. The fake bear growled, screamed, hit the fence with its front paws, and tried to climb over, but it couldn't do it. Sway watched all this in horror. His eyes were frightened, but then he remembered the protective barrier on the house and fence. Meanwhile, the crystals on the fake bear's back suddenly lit up with a bright light. The monster tried to break through the barrier with its stinger, but it didn't work. Sway kept in mind that thanks to the protective barrier, he and the dog could be safe. The boy tried not to panic too much. He looked at the fake bear and thought. It seemed to him that the predator was very strong, even stronger than yesterday's dragon. The boy's eyes were filled with unshakable horror at the sight, and his body was not listening to him again. Sway did not like this. He tried to make his body move, but it stopped moving again. And then he began to think about how they could chase away this predatory fake bear. Chocola was also frightened and barked in response. But suddenly the dog began to bark differently, as if he had found a new target. Sway didn't understand. He thought the dog wanted to go for a walk, so he replied that now was not the best time for a walk. But Chocola continued to bark strangely. And something strange began to happen before Sway's eyes. A cluster of magical energy was colored a beautiful resin color. But why was its power so dark? Sway told Chocola that he knew what to do. After all, now was not the time to go for a walk. He took his magic sword out of its sheath and was ready to attack the predator with all his strength and power. Everything will be fine. The boy believed that he only needed to say the words. He thought. He needed to convey his thoughts. What you ask for is what you will see before you. There was no need to pray to the gods. All he needed was a strong desire. These thoughts were swirling in Sway's head at that moment. He looked at the false bear with determination and confidence, preparing to attack. When Sway was little, he was taught the art of magic and the basic principles of the magical path. He closed his eyes for a second to distract himself from his thoughts and return to reality, and immediately opened them again. He swung his magic sword in the air and shouted for some cool laser beam to come into action. A cluster of magical power headed toward the creature. But the fake bear remained motionless, unresponsive to the magical power. The boy realized that his sword was too weak. He couldn't defeat the monster this way. But Sway did not give up. He was sure that something had to work. And then he had an idea to set the predator on fire. But it was just his imagination. That the fake bear was moving much slower. Could it be the effect of the black energy clot? Sway was surprised. Suddenly, Chocola, who was sitting nearby, screamed and howled. The dog resolutely and bravely headed toward the fake bear. Chocola jumped high into the air. And suddenly, with all his strength and speed, he flew into the fake bear. He pierced right through it, leaving a hole in the predator after the dog. The crystals on its back broke and scattered. Sway watched his dog's second feet and marveled at its power. The fake bear fell to the ground with a crash. The boy and the dog were unharmed. Chocola rushed back to his master. They hugged each other joyfully. Sway exclaimed enthusiastically to Chocola, "What a clever dog," saving him for the second time. The boy said that at first he was scared when the dog became very strong. But he was still his Chocola. After a while, They decided to clean up the yard after killing the fake bear. Sway believed that it was probably all because of the dragon's corpse nearby, because the smell of blood attracts animals in any world. He wanted to bury the fake bear's body or burn it. The crystals on the dead carcass began to glow brightly again. Suddenly, a girl appeared. It was Karen. She shouted at the boy to move away, and as a result, he and Chocola flew several meters back. The girl began to cast a spell, calling upon the brack that enveloped the Gardens of Dreams. And again, a bright light appeared. The corpse of the fake bear was almost gone. Sway watched this and did not understand what was happening. And then the dead body disappeared completely. This surprised the boy the most. Suddenly, he realized that a person had appeared in place of the corpse. Karen explained that after death, the bodies of mutants sprout crystals. Then these explode and destroy everything around them. And then, Karen appeared before Sway. He noticed that this girl was very beautiful. So much so that he had never seen anyone like her, even on television. Karen climbed over the fence into the yard where Sway and Chocola were. The main character was surprised. How was this possible? And why didn't the protective barrier stop the girl? She approached the boy closely, looked him straight in the eyes, and quietly said that they were very similar. Sway did not understand. Then the girl asked if he was Sway Hitano. The boy timidly replied that he was. Karen kindly said that she was very glad that he was okay. Sway stood in front of her in shock. After an awkward pause, the girl leaned toward his face with her lips and gently kissed the boy. Her hair flew in the wind, and Sway's face became even more shocked because he definitely did not expect a kiss. After the kiss, Karen hugged him tightly and happily announced that she had been looking forward to seeing him. Sway couldn't get over the shock and began to apologize to the girl. He noticed that her breasts were very soft and immediately thought that she had confused him with someone else. And who was that anyway? The name Karen immediately popped into Sway's head. He didn't know where from, but for some reason he knew her name. He was about to say something to her, but the girl suddenly fell asleep and collapsed into his arms. The boy couldn't have expected that either. Shock returned to his face. Karen had been panicking just a moment ago, and now she was fast asleep. Sway picked up the girl and carried her into the house. Even Chocola barked at his owner, hinting that Karen needed to rest. Sway thought that they needed hot water for a bath right now, but he realized there was nothing he could do. Karen slept in his arms like a baby. The boy carried her to the bedroom upstairs and gently laid her in bed. He had to be very careful not to touch her where he shouldn't. Sway covered her with a blanket. He felt calmer now that he had managed to take off her robe without touching anything. Of course, he stared a little at her beautiful and perfect body. But Sway immediately caught himself thinking these thoughts and forced himself not to think about such things. He still had some morality and humanity left in him. He was a gentleman, after all. After that, the boy picked up her cloak and wondered how he could wash it. There was no electricity in the house, so he couldn't run the washing machine. It seemed he would have to wash it by hand. Meanwhile, Karen was sleeping soundly in his bed. He admired her and tried to remember her. He knew her from somewhere and even remembered her name. Memories from childhood, when he was 5 years old. Memories that Sway had lost while in Japan. As a child, Sway asked Karen why her ears were so pointed. The girl was embarrassed and asked if it was strange, but the boy reassured her and replied that her ears were pointed, while his were round, so it was surprising to him. Then Karen replied to him. She was an elf, and she didn't have ears. To this day, Sway still doesn't understand what that meant. And why, when he was a child, were he and Karen such good friends? The next morning, the girl came down the stairs in her slippers to the first floor to Sway. The boy was sleeping on the sofa, as the bed was already occupied. They wished each other good morning. Chocola was nearby, barking. Karen saw Chocola and recognized him immediately. She was surprised at how much the dog had grown and was touched by it. Chocola immediately accepted and approved of the girl's behavior. Sway noticed that Chocola lay down next to her with his belly up. He was even more excited than he had been with her and her father. Sway was very surprised by this. And so, they sat down next to each other and started talking. The guy was very tense, but Karen was calm. Sway asked if he could call his guest lady Karen. She immediately refused formalities and replied that he could just call her Karen. Sway was so nervous that he didn't understand her request, and Karen repeated it. Sway hesitated, but he still managed to call her just Karen. The girl repeated her request once more. Because of the awkwardness, Sway asked if she was hungry. He suggested they have breakfast together, but warned her that he only had canned food in the house. The guy opened the cupboard and took out a couple of cans for the girl. He poured her some hot tea. He noticed that Karen was eating a lot and thought that she must be comfortable in his house. The boy put the mug of tea on the table and wanted to say something. He apologized awkwardly to Karen. He explained that until yesterday, he didn't remember her at all. He only remembered that he had been friends with a girl named Karen when he was a child. But in reality, he didn't remember her, and he apologized to her again. The girl replied with a sad face that she already understood. She asked permission to ask the boy a couple of questions. Karen asked why there was no electricity in the house. Sway hesitated in his answer and said that he was now in a different world, so there was no source of electricity here. Karen replied that despite this, there was running water. She thought that electricity and running water had a similar magical structure, and she didn't understand why there was no electricity. She tensed up. Sway thought something was wrong and turned to her. She thought for a moment and apologized, and without waiting for an answer, moved on to the next question. Karen asked Sway what memories he had from before the age of 5. Sway asked if before the age of 5 meant before he started elementary school. Karen also asked if he remembered everything or if he remembered nothing. Or did he not notice that he had forgotten something until she pointed it out to him? The guy wasn't expecting these questions and sat there, surprised. He realized that he didn't remember anything about his life before entering elementary school. How he spent his days back then. The guy replied that he didn't remember anything. He couldn't even try to remember. He couldn't understand how this could be. Karen said that she had analyzed Sway's condition. Apparently, memory replacement had worked here. When the gap between the two worlds was closed, the magical crucible inside Sway cooled down. As a result, the boy unconsciously blocked all his memories so that they would match. Sway thought about Karen's words about memory substitution. He listened to everything and didn't understand anything. Karen kindly asked the boy not to worry and explained everything to him. According to Karen, his memories would gradually return. They were right in the epicenter of a magical crucible. Sway's body had determined on its own which magic to activate first. Sway listened carefully to his friend's words and tried to understand. He was surprised that he had magic. Karen confirmed this and said that the guy was able to turn on the water at home, and it seems he was able to defeat the mutants. The girl said that his magic circulation was also fine. Sway replied that this was excellent. Karen patted Sway on the head and said gently that he had done well and that he was smart. A smile lit up her face. The boy blushed and became very embarrassed. Meanwhile, Chocola barked at them in a friendly manner. Karen patted him on the snout too, for protecting Sway all the time. She sat back down on the sofa, and she decided to ask the boy one more question. She asked about Uncle Kazutaru. The boy began to tell her about him. The thing was, Hatano Kazutaru was his father's name. Suddenly and unexpectedly, a memory of yesterday's accidental kiss with Karen flashed through Sway's mind, and how he had carefully carried her home in his arms. It turned out that she hadn't slept for a long time and was suffering from insomnia. Sway thought she seemed too vulnerable at that moment. Karen said she enjoyed the hugs. Sway thought she was pretending so she could lie in his arms. But no, she wasn't pretending. And the boy noticed that, just like when she was a child, she still loved all kinds of tenderness. But it was only later that Sway realized what he had said, because he had unconsciously begun to remember her. And Chocola was barking strangely. He licked Karen's hands and cuddled with her. Usually, apart from Sway and his father, Chocola didn't fawn over anyone else like that. The boy found this very unusual and strange. Returning from his memories, he noticed that Karen was sitting on the sofa with a sad look on her face and sadness in her eyes. And it seemed to him that Karen cherished his father. He continued talking, finishing the story of his father's death. Karen clenched her hands into fists and pressed them against her knees. She began to cry. Sway noticed this and wanted to comfort her, but the girl replied that she was fine. She told Sway that it was obviously harder for him at that moment. Chocola barked mournfully in support of the girl. Karen hugged the dog and thanked him because Chocola had also had a hard time back then. But Karen immediately said in a sad voice that it was not the time to cry, and she wiped a tear from her cheek. If they were going to mourn Kazutaru's death, it would be as a family. Sway agreed, but then it dawned on him. He didn't have a family. Karen said that Mrs. Viol would be coming soon and asked Sway not to worry. The boy asked why she had said the whole family and who Mrs. Viol was. Karen replied that Viol was his mother. The boy realized this with confusion. He choked on his tea in surprise. He was surprised to learn that his mother was from another world. And then he immediately understood where she had run away to. Sway thought he would never see her again, but she was safe and sound in another world. And now she was rushing to meet him. The guy was upset about this. But why? After all, he couldn't remember his old friend from another world, Karen, nor what had happened between his father and mother. Karen noticed Sway's tension and asked him not to worry about it. She said that the most important thing for him now was to calm down. After all, he did remember something after yesterday's meeting with her. Karen believed that the same would happen after his meeting with Mrs. Viol, but Sway replied that he still knew almost nothing about Karen. Karen kindly asked him again not to worry. The magic crucible inside Sway would gradually recover, and the seal on his memories would fall away on its own. Sway asked what a magic crucible was. Karen explained to him that a magic crucible is an organ inside a person that allows them to control magic. Sway and Chocola's magic crucibles were currently being restored. They were now awakening their magic. The boy asked what kind of magic there are. The girl replied that magic surrounds him everywhere. Everything that seems strange to him is magic. Karen mysteriously asked Sway what he had seen. He told her about all the adventures that had happened over the past few days. He and Chocola had become noticeably stronger. For example, Chocola had cut off a dragon's head. Karen replied that this was a strengthening of the body. It happens on its own when magic circulates through the body. And if he trains, he'll be able to increase this effect. Sway and Karen sat very close to each other. The guy continued his story. Then, when he and the dog were killing the fake bear, or rather, a monster that looked like a fake bear, Sway surrounded it with black fog using his sword. Karen replied that this was specialized magic. Each person has their own special color of magic, and this determines the specialization of their abilities. Karen said that usually the color of magic can be understood by the color of the eyes. Sway replied that his eye color was the same as that of all Japanese people. The girl confidently said that Sway had dark magic and Chocola had light magic. The guy was surprised. The dog barked happily when he heard his name. Karen explained that dark magic is very rare. They say that when all magic is combined, darkness is created, and this is the pinnacle of magic. Sway remarked that it was cool. Karen confirmed this. The boy asked her about Chocola's light magic. She replied that light is one, is the source of magic for all living things on Earth and the basis of magical power in general. Such magic is not found in humans. Therefore, the girl thinks Chocola is also cool. Sway noted that she and Chocola are like the master of darkness and the dog of light, and that it is usually the other way around. The dog barked, but Sway is now sure that his dog is truly incredible. The boy's eyes lit up with excitement and interest. After all, Chocola is truly the light of his life. He and the dog hugged each other joyfully, sharing their delight. Karen asked if Sway had noticed anything else strange. He told her about the barrier around the house that protects them from outside attacks. Sway believed that some kind of special spell had been cast on the house and asked the girl about it. She replied that this was indeed the case, but she clearly hid something and didn't tell him everything. Sway's eyes drooped, and she noticed it. Karen was worried that the guy was upset about it, but he replied that if she didn't want to talk about it, she didn't have to. Sui trasts Karen. After all, she searched so desperately for him. The boy thanked Karen for helping him remember his past. A broad, polite smile appeared on his face. Suddenly, the girl suggested kissing again. She moved even closer to his face. But Sway didn't expect this, wasn't ready, so he wanted to pull away. But Karen didn't let that happen. She asked why Sway didn't want to kiss her. The guy hesitated and couldn't answer such a question. But there was a strong desire and hope in the girl's eyes. He wanted to say something, but she interrupted him. And Sway suddenly blurted out that he hadn't fully remembered Karen yet, so he thought it was wrong to kiss her out of the blue like that. The girl was surprised. Was kissing just a greeting for people in this world? Sway replied that no. Kissing was a sign of love. Karen continued to lean toward him and said that it was good that she and Sway were so similar in this respect. Karen said that Sway used to kiss her all the time, 5 times a day. He didn't believe it. The guy said he was only 5 years old at the time. So, was he some kind of seducer? But the girl just replied that kissing would help awaken his memories. And their lips were getting closer and closer to each other. The thought occurred to Sway that he had nowhere to run from her. And he suddenly cried out that the girl was lying, that they hadn't kissed as children. Karen asked how he knew that, and he replied that Karen's lips always trembled when she was about to do something mischievous. He gave an example of how she once wanted to secretly plant flowers all over the field. Karen didn't expect Sway to remember that. Surprised, she kissed him first. Sway wanted to push her away, but it was too late. He even screamed, and Karen, after the kiss, confirmed that she had lied to him. There were no kisses 5 times a day, and Sway was no seducer. But the girl noticed that he did remember something. She gracefully moved away from him. The guy asked in fear, "What is it?" Karen replied that her lips trembling was a habit of hers, one that no one knew about except her family. She said that at least Sway was able to remember something about her. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Sorks, in the northeastern region of Gregorum, at the southern edge of the Forest of Emptiness, was the village of Sidera. The action takes place in the living room of the Sidera Adventurers Guild branch. The living room was richly decorated, with luxurious upholstered armchairs next to a large, spacious window overlooking the beautiful surrounding nature. A woman and a man were sitting in these armchairs, talking to each other. The woman's name was Laminaria, the head of a special reconnaissance group. The man was the head of the cliché Bearingly Guild branch. He told Ms. Laminaria that the goods had arrived in the village. The transfer had taken place, and he entrusted her with unloading the goods. The woman replied that this was fine and that the nightly order would take care of everything. She placed her cup of tea neatly on the table. The man informed her that the merchant guild had prepared an empty warehouse for this purpose, and that Laminaria could use it as she wished. The woman replied somewhat anxiously that the unloading might be delayed for a short time. But the main thing was that the knights did not rock the boat there. The man said that although there were still some normal guys among the royal knights, the locals could cause them problems. So he asked Lady Laminaria to be careful during the negotiations, and to remember that these knights were influenced by their group and were different from ordinary people. The lady replied just as sternly that, in all the time she had not seen him, he had become quite arrogant. She immediately asked him not to turn up his nose too high. The man grimaced in displeasure and indignation, but he did not remain silent. He shouted that there was no other way. After all, he was the boss, and to be the boss, you had to be able to intimidate your subordinates. But the lady did not take these words seriously and smiled a little. Smiling, she said that he should at least give her a chance to praise him for his successes, because the man had really grown up during this time. And she noted that he would no longer cry at the sight of a goblin, as he had 13 years ago. The man was indignant and asked Laminaria not to bring up these conversations about the past. He mentioned that the lady in front of him was an old woman over 70 years old, but she still acted like a young girl. The woman smiled at this. She replied that he, too, could perform such magic. The man responded that not everyone could be such a great magician. In his opinion, it was easy for Laminaria to say such things when she herself was a witch. He was even angrier than before, waving his arms and expressing his indignation at the woman's behavior. But then he asked where her boss was. After all, he had heard that she had arrived in Sidera. Laminaria replied that her boss had not visited her. She thought that she had gone straight to the forest without even stopping in the village. The man was also indignant and asked how this was possible. The woman replied that such things happen. After all, her boss was a great magician of a different kind. Although they both had the title of witch, it was only because there was no title higher than witch in their system of titles. Although the boss was born much later than Laminaria, the lady said that even 3 lifetimes would not be enough for her to achieve the same level that her boss had achieved 12 years ago. She carefully picked up her cup of tea again. The man said that he had heard a lot about her, but that she was called the Witch of the Heavenly Bell. But as a resident of Sidera, he was even glad that such magicians were exploring this forest. The lady replied that explore was not the right word. After all, her boss was not interested in the resources of the Void Forest at all. But there was a good chance that they would find a base deep in the forest, but only if they supported her boss. Laminaria ordered the man to keep strict records of food and other supplies. They had to be sure that they could provide her with everything she needed. The woman mysteriously approached the window and thoughtfully gazed out at it. But suddenly she turned and announced sharply that everything was different. The boss might lose interest in their village. The man heard this and bowed his head heavily. He constantly feels a sense of despair. So many people spend time and money trying to conquer the forest of emptiness, but most of them only reach the middle part. And here, a single girl with exceptional abilities is trying to reach the deep part of the forest on her own. In his opinion, it is too rare for the strength of one individual to surpass the strength of an entire squad. The man thoughtfully scratched the back of his head and sank into thought. And Mrs. Laminaria playfully stroked his head and asked him not to be sad. After all, even the Witch of the Heavenly Bell cannot achieve everything alone, including building a base like Sidera in the middle of the forest. They may be weak, but as long as they keep trying their best, the time will come when even the witch herself will rely on them. Memories from 20 years ago come flooding back. A selfish and arrogant girl with magical talent that comes once in a millennium changed after one fateful encounter. She tempered her pride and became much kinder to others. 13 years ago, she lost her husband and son, but even in her despair, she continued to study magic in order to bring her family back. And now she has gone down in history as the most powerful witch in the world. She may still not be known for her kindness, but she understands that there are some things even she cannot do. This was reported by Ms. Laminaria. She also stated that they must support her later. After all, she is the grandmother of Viol Hatano, the Witch of the Heavenly Bell. Meanwhile, Sway and Karen were still together. Sway became interested in learning more about heavenly magic. In this world, there's technology for transmitting messages over long distances. The guy showed Karen his smartphone, which can be used to write messages. But Karen showed him communication crystals that looked like smartphones. The crystals recorded the magical waves around them and sent them through the air, where they were displayed in another communication crystal. But Sway replied that he still didn't understand anything. Communication crystals are not as high-tech as smartphones, and only 3 other crystals can receive messages. These messages are small, and it takes time to send and receive them. Karen sent a message to Viol, Sway's mother, through such a crystal. Karen believes that Viol will reach home in 5 days, and Sway knows this. Apparently, as Sway believes, it was carried to a fairly deep part of the forest. Karen happened to be working nearby, so she got to him pretty quickly. But the guy was worried that Karen would get in trouble at work for this. He realized he had 5 more days. Sway was gardening and digging in the yard. And to be honest, Sway is even a little worried. He knows nothing about his mother. He was raised by his single father, and he didn't even miss his mother. He didn't feel love or even hatred for her. What if Sway still couldn't remember her? He wondered how he would behave when he met her. It would be rude not to show any emotion. Sway remembers how his father told him as a child that his mother loved him and his father. She doesn't live with them not because she abandoned them. She had no choice. She didn't abandon them. Sway never doubted his father's words. Suddenly, Chocola interrupted his train of thought. Sway turned around and wanted to see Chocola. But then he remembered that the dog and Karen had gone hunting. The boy calmed down. Before that, Karen had spoken kindly and warned Sway not to eat so much food. Sway asked why, but the girl hid something again and smiled sweetly. She asked him not to be afraid, because she and Chocola would bring food. Sway was still afraid to go into the forest, so he stayed at home. The boy decided to do some gardening. He took out a large shovel and a bag of various fertilizers for vegetables. It was his first time gardening, so he did it with great enthusiasm. And in the garage, he suddenly found a book titled Gardening for Dummies. Sway was delighted because he really needed it. He wondered if his father had somehow predicted that Sway would be transported to another world. He was pleased that his father had taken care of him. Suddenly, he found some cool water and drank it with pleasure. The boy felt even happier and better. He had long wondered whether it was safe to drink the water here. But everything turned out fine. Karen had said that everything would be okay, and the boy remembered her words as he held the glass in his hands. The water from the tap and the well was clean, but no one explained to the boy why that was. He thought that it was probably somehow connected with his memories, but Karen didn't want to tell him anything. According to Sway, Karen thinks it's better for him to remember everything himself. It seems that both the food and water supplies in the house are somehow connected to his memories. And, to be honest, Sway admits that he is very interested in finding out how. Just then, Chocola and Karen returned from hunting. The dog barked, and the girl laughed. Sway asked them how it went and congratulated them on their return. He told Chocola that she looked cool. The dog had a wreath of forest flowers and leaves braided into her fur. Sway compared the dog to sushi with vegetables. That is appetizing. He hugged the dog and praised it, calling it clever, because the dog had brought in a lot of food. Chocola barked happily. The main character asked Karen what she had caught. The girl proudly showed him a small dead creature that looked like a dragon. Sway was surprised, and the girl had a big smile on her face. She said it was a lizard, and that it was different from dragons. Sway asked how. Dragons are intelligent creatures. They have their own culture and language. Sway commented in surprise that it sounded like fantasy. He asked his friend about the dragon he and Chocola had encountered on their first day here. His face was a little tense. Karen replied that it was probably a wyvern, which are similar to lizards. She asked him not to confuse them with dragons. Sway didn't argue and replied that he would be more careful next time. He asked if these lizards were tasty. Eating was really important to him right now, and the girl replied that they were very tasty. Sway said he was looking forward to it. Lizards are fast creatures that are not easy to catch. When they appear in human villages, they cause enormous damage. Karen told him this, and Sway listened attentively. The boy actually thought that they only roamed in the forests. But Karen looked at him indignantly, as if he had said something wrong. Sway asked what that meant. The girl leaned closer to the boy and repeated that lizards are fast creatures that are not so easy to catch. Sway replied that this was the first time he had heard this, and she pointed out that she had caught 2 of them. The girl was clutching one of the lizards viciously in her hands. Sway was puzzled and surprised, but Karen replied that it wasn't about the numbers, and she got even angrier. She reminded him that Sway had praised Chocola, and in fact, she was offended by the guy because he didn't praise her for her work and the 2 lizards she caught. But Sway realized that he was indeed to blame. The guy apologized to the girl and said that he didn't understand it right away. He noticed that the girl had caught the lizards herself and wanted to continue his thought, but didn't have time. Karen suddenly leaned her head closer to him. She reminded him that when Sway praised Chocola, he stroked her head, and she expected Sway to do the same with her. The boy stood rooted to the spot, not knowing what to do, not expecting such actions. There was incomprehension and slight embarrassment in his eyes. But he still gently stroked the girl's hair with his hand, and she liked it. But very soon, the boy became too embarrassed, and he turned away. Karen said it was time to start cooking. After a while, they started cooking together. The lizards were already lying on the cutting board. Karen cut everything into pieces with a sharp knife, just like a chicken. Raw thighs and breasts lay before her. Sway was impressed by her skills. He happily said that they had found a book for the stove. He had never been camping, so this would definitely come in handy. The guy went over to the stove and said that he didn't even want to use the new stove. It was a shame. But he noticed that, judging by the marks on it, his late father had already tried it out. Meanwhile, Karen finished with the lizard carcasses and had already gathered some branches to start a fire. Sway replied guiltily that he felt like he was sitting on her neck. Karen took this phrase too literally and asked if he really wanted to sit on her neck. Sway replied that no, he meant something else. They took the stove out into the yard and lit a fire. Smoke immediately began to pour out of the stovepipe, and they started cooking. A table with all the kitchen utensils was already set up outside. Sway picked up a knife, placed a cutting board with lizard meat in front of him, and was about to begin. He said that this was his first time cooking meat from another world. But since Karen said it was similar to chicken, Sway would treat it the same way. He wanted to boil the breast, stew the wings, and fry the thighs. He used spices from the kitchen because Karen had nothing but salt, and Sway wanted to thank her. He poured soy sauce into the pot with the meat and began cooking. Chocola sat nearby and smelled the meat, wanting to try it too. Sway kindly told the dog that he would get a portion too, and the dog barked happily. The herbs that Chocola brought smelled like rosemary, so Sway wanted to add them to the breast. He added sake, mirin, and soy sauce to the wings, just like in Japan. He would simply fry the thighs with salt. Sway was happy and smiled. He was curious to see what would come of the ingredients from another world. The sky was cloudless, clear, and sunny. Of course, Sway's meat took a long time to cook. But today, Sway and Karen had lizard thighs with steamed herbs for lunch, and then lizard wings with the root part of the herbs. The rest was still stewing and would be left for dinner. Sway showed and presented his dishes to Karen, and the girl's eyes lit up even more. She was happy and very impressed. So was Chocola, standing nearby. Sway held a plate of boiled breast in his hands and thought that it was the first time he had cooked something like this. He was curious to see how it would taste. They sat down on the steps and got ready to eat. Karen asked if Sway had learned how to cook this in his world. He replied that he had. His father was often away at work, and he had to cook. A smile appeared on Sway's face. The girl praised him and ruffled his hair. Sway replied that she shouldn't until she had tasted all the dishes. They didn't know yet if it was tasty, so he asked the girl to try it first and then praise him. Karen picked up a piece of meat dripping with spicy juice. She announced in a joyful voice that it was delicious. Sway also took a thigh and was delighted that he had succeeded. Lizard meat is similar to chicken, but very tender. It smells like flowers. It's quite fatty, but you just want to eat it. Sway and Karen sat and ate all the dishes with gusto. The guy asked what the herbs were. They tasted like spinach mixed with chrysanthemums, and a little bitter. Sway noted that he probably did the right thing by soaking it in water for a while. Despite all this, Karen enthusiastically declared that it was very tasty and continued to eat the thighs. She called Sway a genius, because it was the most delicious lizard meat she had ever tasted. In Karen's opinion, it was tastier than what they cooked at the palace. Sway was surprised that he had cooked such delicious meat, and Karen confirmed it. Chocola also got some. He was happy too. Sway said that he thought Chocola was just happy to eat meat, even if it was simply boiled. Karen asked Sway to cook something for Lady Viole when she arrived. They continued eating. Sway replied that it was fine and agreed to cook. Maybe she'll be happy. After that, Sway and Chocola went for a walk. The dog was on a leash. The guy asked the dog to let him know if it sensed any danger. Chocola has Siberian husky blood, so he simply needs to move around a lot. Hunting wasn't enough for him, so Sway takes him for walks. When the boy complained to Karen that the forest was dangerous, she said that monsters would not approach the place where the wyvern and the mutant had died, so she allowed them to walk freely near the house. So after lunch, Sway and Chocola went into the forest. During the walk, the boy noticed that you couldn't tell his dog was already old, and it was good that this would never change. Without Chocola, he would not have ventured beyond the barrier out of fear. But with Chocola by his side, the main character felt very calm. Upon returning home, they noticed an unfortunate situation and a failure. Since they had no light, Sway realized that when the sun went down, they would be in complete darkness. Sway wasn't hungry yet, as he had eaten late. But when he did get hungry, it would definitely be dark, and there would be nothing to eat. The guy was seriously concerned about this. He had the idea of saving the breast for tomorrow. But to reheat it, he would need to light the stove again. Then he realized that there was little time left. He could only do the most necessary things, because after sunset, there would be nothing he could do. Sway was sad because he needed to wash his clothes. He had one change of clothes, but Karen had only one set. She left all her things and rushed to meet him. Sway understood this. Hand washing takes a lot of time, but the guy wanted to do the laundry and then take a bath. He had shampoo and other toiletries, but no electricity or hot water. Everything depends on electricity. Only now did Sway understand this. Modern civilization is built on electricity. With it, people can live peacefully even after sunrise, and it reduces the time spent on all kinds of household chores. It also gives people more free time by freeing them from manual labor. When Sway arrived here, he decided to simply ignore this problem. But now he understands that he cannot. He needs electricity. But suddenly his eyes widened, and he was overcome with surprise and shock. What kind of transformation was this? But it was already like that when he entered the house. But the situation is different. Sway understood. That dark matter during the battle with the mutant was his mana. Inside him, he remembered Karen mentioning that he might have some kind of unusual power within himself. She told him that he could think that for now, but without giving any details. Sway himself filled this house with his unusual power, and he himself unconsciously built a barrier around it. An automatic shield created by the shadow magic of time. The shield activates when it senses danger. Water flowed from the tap. Water was in the well, and the used water drained into some kind of sewer. All this was the result of confusion caused by dark magic in space. Then Sway thought that his house was still connected to his world and brought his magical connections from there. He doesn't fully understand it yet, but this is not related to his lost memories, but to his abilities. And beyond all these thoughts, Sway remembered something. Sure enough, he had lived in this house as a child, with his father, mother, Karen, and Chocola. They had everything, water and electricity. Because the boy's father could use magic, when Karen entered the house, she asked why there was no electricity. Karen knew that Sway, like his father, must have similar abilities. The boy stood in front of the house and tried with all his might to use magic to create electricity in the house. And he succeeded. Karen was very happy about this. He was also delighted that they now had electricity. The boy happily picked up Chocola and spun around with her. Karen jokingly asked him to calm down a little, but the boy replied that he hadn't been in the bathroom for 2 days and it was time for him to wash up. Karen was surprised that he said that after only 2 days. The girl said that in this world there was also a culture of bathing, but they didn't go to the bathroom every day. For this, you need the appropriate amenities in the house. Not all commoners have a bathtub at home. Moreover, the water here is not heated simply by fire magic, but with a large amount of firewood. Sway replied that there were plenty of trees nearby, but fresh wood would definitely not be suitable, not even for a boiler. But Karen suddenly announced that she possessed the magic of air and water. Therefore, she could quickly dry the wood. The guy replied that the goddess Karen was the best and jumped for joy. And the girl gave the order to gather branches before it got dark. But clouds were already gathering in the sky. After they gathered branches and made a pile in the middle of the yard, Karen said that there was a lot of mana in the area which plants feed on. So these branches were much less susceptible to magic than plants outside the forest. The girl sat squatting in front of the pile of branches, looking serious. Sway sat down opposite her and realized that he had somehow been transported to the forest of emptiness. And it turned out that this forest of emptiness was one of the most dangerous places on the planet, an unholy world that humans could not penetrate. Karen confirmed his thoughts and guesses. She noted that, for example, Chocola had defeated a wyvern, whose claws could kill teams of adventurers and orders of knights. And for this bear-like mutant, the wyvern would have been easy prey. Sway remembered that this mutant was terrifying. That night, they slept as usual. But for how long? The guy became anxious about it. Karen continued and said that mutants rarely leave their territory, so she asked the guy to just be careful. Anyway, she was sure he could defeat them anyway. A smile lit up the girl's face. She replied that everything was ready. Sway thanked her and suggested heating the water. The guy went over to a special heating machine. This device would help with both the water temperature and ventilation. His father even prepared instructions for Sway on how to use this machine. The boy felt sincere gratitude toward his father. Now, it was time to do the laundry, but Karen sadly informed him that she had no other clothes. She asked if the guy wanted her to walk around naked, but Sway replied that no, he didn't want that at all. Besides, he had another set of clothes. He frantically told the girl this, and they got ready to go to the bathroom. Sway let the girl go first. He told her that there was shampoo and shower gel there, and asked if she knew how to use them. The girl knew and just asked him to show her where everything was. Karen was about to politely suggest that Sway take a bath with her, but he flatly refused. Karen said indignantly that they used to bathe together. Sway immediately noticed and guessed that she was not lying. And so, a full hot bath was already drawn for Karen so that she could relax and wash. She stretched gently and enjoyed her time. She felt very comfortable. Meanwhile, Sway was sitting with Chocola and noticed that he was a little dirty. He suggested that the dog take a bath too. In fact, Chocola was a little scared and tense. Then Karen finished washing, followed by Sway, and then Chocola. Life with electricity is a fairy tale, according to Sway. And their stove is working now too. He and Karen were sitting in the living room. Sway shared his stretched-out t-shirt with the girl so that she would have at least some change of clothes. They settled comfortably into the armchairs and talked. Chocola sat nearby, unhappy about being bathed. Sway, sitting in his chair, remembered and thought to himself that when they were children, Karen often exhausted Chocola with her games, which is why he ran away to the boy. And then the main character remembered. When he turned on the electricity, he felt as if he had found a piece of his heart. It was as if he was putting together a puzzle from what he already knew. The L-shaped sofa, the curtains, little Chocola in the garden, his young parents. So far, Sway cannot reproduce the magic his father used. So this house is still far from perfect, the boy thought. But setting it up is clearly related to how he is getting used to life in this world. And now he had only put together one piece of the puzzle. But the memory of his mother left a burning hole in Sway's chest. The next day, Karen announced in a cheerful voice that she was going hunting, and Chocola was going with her. She asked Sway if he would go too, but he replied that he wanted to chop some wood. In his opinion, they couldn't continue to rely on the branches that Karen was drying. He wanted to chop some logs himself and leave them to dry. Besides, cutting down tree branches wasn't right either. Karen replied that he should cut down a tree nearby. She added that one trunk would yield a lot of firewood. Sway said it was a good idea, but he had neither the knowledge, nor the skills, nor the tools to do so. The boy was going to find something in the warehouse for this purpose. But the girl came very close to him and said that he didn't need to look for anything. Sway didn't understand and asked what she meant by that. And Karen said he had a sword. Sway didn't understand again. He picked up the sword, looked at it, and casually said that it could certainly be used to cut branches, but not a whole tree for firewood. Karen smiled and replied that she knew Sway could even cut down a tree. The guy was surprised at how much his friend believed in him and doubted it. Karen said seriously that Kazuduru had always used this sword. Sway was surprised to hear his father's name. Karen said that during their adventures with Lady Viole, Kazuduru had gathered the necessary materials, for which the famous blacksmith had forged the sword. The girl clearly remembered that Kazuduru's uncle had always used this particular sword, but Sway replied gloomily that he didn't remember. Karen explained that this was because the memories were sealed, and it was not surprising. She was a little older than him, so she remembered everything. Karen and Mrs. Viole often remembered them after they disappeared. Sway was delighted and smiled at this. The sword in his hands was magical, and the boy was surprised by this. The sword was forged with the use of magical abilities in mind, as Karen explained, and the blade corresponds to the swordsman's magical predisposition. The girl said that Sway and his uncle had the same shadow specialization, which is why the guy could use it. Sway said that when he fought the mutant, the sword was surrounded by something like a black mist. Karen thinks that this is not all that the sword is capable of. A slight smile appeared on her face. She asked the boy to continue trying and learning new things. She is sure that Kazuduru will show him the way. Sway guessed that this sword was a farewell gift from his father to him. He looked at the sword with mysterious and melancholic eyes. The boy went beyond the courtyard and entered the forest. He looked at the trees, thought, and pondered. He couldn't stand up yet, but Sway wanted to try to wrap the sword with a magical power inside him. Through the sword's hilt, shadow magic permeates the entire blade. Knowledge about the structure of the magical sword was passed on to Sway through the records of the past. The sword is not that difficult to use. A special attribute is embedded in it with the help of shadow magic. His father said during his lifetime that he was sure the boy would succeed. Dark magic. Its name is Ridil. With his sword, Sway sharply and efficiently cut several nearby trees into pieces with ease. He mentally thanked his father for this knowledge. However, Sway thinks it's kind of weird to name the sword after a weapon he didn't get to use in the game. When he got home, the boy began to chop the trunks into smaller pieces of firewood. He sat down in the yard and began to work. Chopping wood with the sword was very easy for the boy, and he felt as if he were no longer human. Even at such high speeds, he doesn't get tired. After chopping the wood, Sway realized that it needed to be left to dry. Karen called out to him, a little anxiously, and that scared the guy. A large bird carcass hung from her shoulders. It wasn't easy to cut up the bird Karen had caught. They hung their prey upside down from a tree branch, and a tremendous amount of blood flowed out of it. But that's okay, Sway admits. According to Karen, this bird was very large and tasty. They cooked and ate it that same day. Sway agreed. The bird tasted even less like chicken than lizard. Sway would say it was more like beef. Then, after a while, the guy told Karen that he wanted to set up a workspace for himself. But there were no nails in the warehouse, so he suggested doing without them. Karen just calmly replied that whatever happens, happens. They sat together on the sofa and drank tea. Sway suggested his own version of events, to set up a workspace outside the garden, because otherwise everything would be covered in blood. But Karen had another option, and she suggested creating an area by cutting down the trees by the fence. But Sway was afraid for the barrier. The girl replied that if Sway thought of this area as part of the house, there would be no problem. She calmly held her cup of tea in her hands. Life in another world had just begun, but Sway admitted that his first difficult day and these 2 days were vastly different. The guy thanked Chocola, who was sitting next to him, for hunting for them, and he apologized for making such an old man work. A smile lit up Sway's face. Karen wondered why the boy called the dog an old man. He explained that Chocola had been with him since childhood, so he was already an old man. Sway thought that Karen didn't know how long dogs lived. But the girl asked with a surprised look, did the guy really think Chocola was a dog? Sway's eyes widened in surprise. It turned out that Chocola was Kushur's dog. Karen said that it was not just a dog. Sway was even more surprised. Kushur are magical creatures similar to dogs. Sway asked why Chocola was a magical creature. After all, his father had told him his whole life that Chocola was a Siberian husky mix. And then the boy realized that his father had always lied to him. Karen replied that he had lied so as not to cause the boy any distress. Chocola barked, and Sway realized that this was not just a husky mix. The boy was even more surprised than when the wyvern appeared, more than when he saw the mutant, and even more than when Karen kissed him. Kushur are very rare creatures, one of the creations of the divine will. They live in the Helkheim Valley. They are very powerful creatures, capable of defeating even mutants. In the lands of the Beastmen, they are revered as guardian deities. Karen heard that Kazutaru and Mrs. Viol picked up Chocola while traveling. So he's even a little younger than Sway and Karen. It had dawned on the boy that his dog wasn't old at all, and the girl confirmed it. Kushur lived for at least 100 years, so Chocola still has a long life ahead of him. Sway listened to his friend's stories with surprise and attention. He was delighted and told Chocola that he had been very worried about this. The dog looked at his owner with loyal eyes and barked. And then night fell. The kids went to bed. Sway slept in his place in the bedroom. Karen missed the living room and decided to sleep there. The boy thought about her and didn't understand why she was sleeping in the living room, since there was plenty of room in the house. Suddenly, there was a creaking sound. Sway heard it. He saw Chocola slowly and carefully making his way through the door to his room, looking sad. The boy wondered when the dog had learned to open doors. Chocola wanted to sleep together. Sway realized once again that Chocola was not just a husky. He apologized to his pet for treating him like an old man. After all, he was still so young. Chocola just barked approvingly and sat down next to him. Sway was very happy that Chocola was full of energy. The boy was very worried that the dog might grow old very soon. He was even prepared to buy diapers for the dog. He apologized again for this. Chocola barked happily. Sway realized that Chocola was actually 100 years old. At least the boy knew that he would not be left alone. Thanks to his inner magical energy, he could extend his life by decades. Not only Chocola's, but Karen's and his own as well. All this time, Sway had been preparing himself for the realization that, no matter how hard he tried, Chocola would die before him. He had to accept it as inevitable. But since childhood, Chocola had supported the boy in difficult times, both in Japan and in another world. What realization? What acceptance? Sway told Chocola that now they would be together forever. The dog and Sway hugged each other warmly. The boy was very happy and even cried. He once again thanked Chocola warmly and sincerely, and said that he loved him very much and would spend his whole life with him. He would always be close to it. After all, he was Chocola's older brother. Meanwhile, in the village of Sidera, the State Royal Magic Academy, an institute for studying the phenomenon of the crack between the boundaries of worlds. The director of this institute is Viol Hitano. In the academy hall, in front of Ms. Viol, there were a woman and a man who worked with her sitting on the sofa. They were wondering why Ms. Viol had deviated from the plan and decided to visit their village. Viol politely addressed the aunt and asked her to call her simply Viol, without all these formalities. Laminaria, sitting opposite her, did not resist and asked what had happened. According to Laminaria, Viol had clearly spent a lot of time visiting them, and she asked Viol not to forget how influential she was. Their boy, at the sight of her, becomes like a fawn thrown to the dragon to be torn apart. She was referring to Bearingly. Viol asked, what did she have to do with it? Laminaria continued that Viol hadn't even warned them about her arrival. The woman indignantly replied that her circumstances had changed, but Karen had arrived before her. She told Viol that everything was fine. Therefore, she explained that the urgency of the task had disappeared, but the woman still felt uneasy. Laminaria asked what Karen had told her. Viol replied that Karen had reported that there were no dangers, but that they were running out of resources. She believed that if she rushed to the boys, their resources would run out even faster. So Viole stopped by the village to replenish her supplies. Laminaria replied that they would help as much as they could. Viole warmly thanked her aunt for her understanding and help. She handed her a small piece of paper. It was a list of what Viole needed. Laminaria and Bearingly looked at the list, read it, and replied that they could get all the items from the trade guild. But the load would be considerable, so they would have to wait for a cart. And even if they found it, there were no horses. They would have to wait until Tarasca arrived. Viole replied seriously that she could do without a cart. She was sure that all the goods would fit in her backpack. Laminaria sternly said that with such a large amount of cargo, a cart was essential. She was surprised that Viole was going to carry everything herself while the mutants tried to attack her. The lady said she wasn't worried about the number of mutants or the weight of the load. In the worst case, she would only move a little slower. But even then, Viole said she would be able to move even at night. She began to speak in a plaintive, melancholy voice, saying that it was especially difficult for her son. Therefore, she must do everything she could to help him. After all, she was his mother. Viole smiled sadly. After Viole left, the man lay down on the sofa, tired and heavy. Laminaria asked him what was wrong and told him to pull himself together. But suddenly the woman became thoughtful. She said in a worried voice that she was anxious. Bearingly asked why she was worried. He knew that everything would be fine, because Viole's magic crucible was very powerful. Mutants were no match for her. Laminaria replied sadly that that wasn't the point. She said that Viole's son was having a hard time. The man didn't see anything special in this and asked what was wrong. He explained that Viole's family had come into this world through a rift between worlds. Laminaria said anxiously that she noticed that Viole did not mention her husband at that moment. This worried her greatly, especially since it would definitely not be difficult for Kazutoru's son. She suggested that perhaps Viole had simply changed her route and stopped by to ease her soul in some way. The woman paced restlessly around the room, thinking, looking out the window, and reflecting. Bearingly continued to sit on the sofa, but he understood that Laminaria was hinting at something. He wanted to express his thoughts, but couldn't. Laminaria said that for the first time in 13 years, Viole's magical power was so concentrated. She sadly lowered her head, but, according to Laminaria, perhaps Viole was just holding back so as not to offend any of them. Bearingly began to get angry. The woman calmed down a little and smiled. She said that Viole's face expressed maternal love. At that moment, she was not a wife or a woman, but specifically the mother of her son. And that is why Laminaria believes that there is no love in the world stronger than that of a mother for her son. Meanwhile, Sway and Karen had had electricity for 3 days. During those 3 days, the guy managed to get his life back on track. But the coolest thing he managed to learn was a new magic. Food replenishment. I think Kazutoru called it something like that. The name speaks for itself. With this magic, the shelves never run out of food. Sway was surprised that such magic existed, but he doesn't really understand how it works. However, he thinks it's the same magic that gave him electricity and water. The boy thought about how the confusion caused by shadow magic and space worked to return the shelves to their original state. But he realized that this was probably not the case, and he still lacked the knowledge. Sway quickly filled the kitchen shelves with food, bottles of water, and treats for Chocola. Then he filled the cabinets with all kinds of spices. And in the bathroom, he added laundry detergent and a bathing kit. Now, the goods that Sway could only get in Japan would never run out. And if you take something from the cabinet and then close it, the item will reappear the next day. And then Karen approached him in her slippers. Sway turned to her. He stood in front of her with a bottle of shampoo and suggested selling shampoo in this world, especially since they now had so much of it. But Karen replied that she did not recommend doing so. Sway immediately thought that this would undermine the economy of this world. The girl replied that yes, and besides, the problem was the limits of the guy's magic. He didn't understand what those limits were. Karen explained. If they took all the bottles of water off the shelf at once, they would hardly see new bottles in their place the next day. Sway suggested that this might be because he didn't have enough mana. Karen replied that, in general, that was the case. More specifically, it was due to the nature of magic. The girl asked the boy to just keep in mind that if he took out too many objects, they would be gone forever. If Sway was careless, they would wake up tomorrow with empty boxes. The boy replied that this was terrible. He understood that Karen meant they should be more careful with the things they had. But even before this magic appeared, he had taken many things from the shelf. And, probably, in Sway's opinion, this was now the original state to which the shelf would return. Karen smiled and replied that Sway was right. The guy realized that this cheat ability would help them survive. And it wasn't worth destroying this world with his magic. It would be somehow ugly, and also disrespectful to his father. But to be fair, Sway didn't think he would be transported with the house deep into the forest either. For the most part, his life had settled down. But there were times when he and Karen felt that something was missing. Sway said anxiously that they didn't have enough clothes. Karen covered her face with a t-shirt and quietly replied that she didn't mind wearing his clothes. She liked Sway's smell. But the main character was surprised again because he and Karen only have one bottle of laundry detergent between them. Karen replied that she was joking and that there really was a problem with clothes. Sway also said that he needed tools. He wanted to make a table for cutting up carcasses, but they didn't have any nails or a hammer. After all, without tools, he couldn't come up with anything. The guy asked how long it would take to get to the nearest town. Karen replied that if they used body enhancement and ran without stopping to sleep, it would take about 3 days. Sway asked how long it would take by the usual route. The girl said that by the usual route, with overnight stops, it would take somewhere between 7 and 10 days. The boy was genuinely surprised at such a big difference. Karen said that it would take about the same amount of time with a horse-drawn carriage. She said that in this world, people travel in iguana carts pulled by tame animals. She said that iguanas are very hardy and can pull a cart for 3 days without sleep. Sway was also surprised by this. But Karen suddenly turned to him seriously and said that Mrs. Viol would be back soon. She asked Sway not to go anywhere. The boy replied that he knew that. In his opinion, Viol would not miss their house. Karen said that the merchants would definitely not reach them. They were in uncharted territory. Sway might not feel it, but ordinary people could not enter here. It was a world of impurity. Sway thought that they were in the Amazon rainforest, according to the girl's stories. But still, the guy firmly stated that after meeting his mother, he was going to get out of the city. He found medicine and bandages in the cabinets, so Sway thinks there's no need to worry about that. But we can't rule out the possibility that Karen and Sway could suffer serious injuries. And they could also catch diseases that are unique to this world. Sway also wants fruit seeds and dairy products, but he probably thinks that it won't be possible to graze a cow or a goat in the garden. He would also like miso, dashi broth, glutamic acid, inosine acid, and seafood. Sway also remembered that there's a river nearby, and maybe he could go fishing. But for that, he needs a fishing rod. The boy said aloud that human desires are endless. Karen sat next to him and said nothing. Chocola barked at his feet, and Sway gazed dreamily at the ceiling and immersed himself in his stream of thoughts. Sometime later, according to the plan, it was time for the guys to work the land. A week of life in another world had passed, and Sway thought they needed a break. He and Karen had fun. The ability to store meat in the refrigerator was very helpful to them. True, Sway regretted that his ability to replenish food did not work in this case. But on the other hand, Karen and Chocola would not have to hunt so often. They had meat, herbs, and firewood. Karen asked if that meant they could do nothing today. Be idle? Play? Her face beamed with delight because she had been waiting for a break for a long time. Chocola squealed with pleasure nearby. The main character replied that it was time to expand their territory. Sway joyfully exclaimed that they would create a place for cutting up carcasses. And Karen's excitement evaporated. She wanted to rest, not work, and was indignant. Sway told her that rest was necessary in order to do what they hadn't had time for. The girl sat down on the sofa and curled up wearily. She turned to Sway and said sadly that she couldn't even imagine what twisted principles had been drummed into him. The guy replied confusedly that these were normal principles. And if they worked now, life would only get easier. The boy said that while they were working on the street, Chocola could go for a walk. The dog barked in approval. Karen got up from the sofa wearily and said discontentedly that next time they would rest normally. And she agreed to her friend's idea, after all. Sway jokingly apologized to the girl and explained that he just had his own ideas about rest. The sky was clear, cloudless, and very sunny. It was just a perfect day for gardening. Sway and Karen worked near the Hitano house, next to the field. They had a plan to clear the area around the field and build a place for cutting up carcasses. It was not far from where the guys had buried the wyvern's head. Sway looked at the forest and realized that expanding the territory was, of course, an exaggeration. He swung his magic sword. The tree trunks were chopped down in an instant. Sway asked Chocola to knock down the branches, and the dog understood everything. He helped his master and supported him. Sway realized that his dog was cool, but Chocola started eating bugs from the leaves of the trees. The guy immediately scolded him for this and forbade him to do so. Karen came over and reassured Sway that Kushur are omnivores. Chocola sat with a sad look on his face and lowered his head. The girl said that if the poison in the bugs wasn't strong, the dog would be fine. Besides, Chocola would have smelled the poison. She told Sway that he was worrying too much about the dog. The boy agreed and explained that he had considered Chocola an ordinary dog for 13 years, so he was worried. It wasn't so easy to calm him down. The boy crouched down next to the dog and gently stroked its head. He decided to trust the dog's sense of smell after all. but he added that it would be better if the dog didn't eat anything strange. Chocola stopped being sad and understood his owner's request. Karen said that in this world, living beings are allotted as much as their inner magic, artifacts, and level of mana allow. In general, this is about 100 years. Usually, as long as they have enough magic, they do not age, and Karen is sure of this. She stated emphatically that there are those who look 20 years old, even at 60 or 70. Sway listened to her attentively and was surprised. Unlike humans, elves' bodies can hold more mana, which is why they say that elves live long lives. Karen hinted at herself. Sway said that she was about the same age as him. Karen confirmed this and added that this was why she was 20 years old to him. She suddenly fell silent and didn't finish her sentence, lowering her eyes. Sway smiled and replied that he understood. The girl immediately looked displeased and angrily declared that Sway had forced her to say that. Still, in her opinion, he had been raised strangely. She wanted to spank him for that. Sway laughed. He cheerfully explained that he just wanted to know how old his family members were and when their birthdays were. Karen suddenly turned away, silent. Family members, how sweet. She thought about it and felt embarrassed. Meanwhile, several small holes had been dug in the ground in front of the boys, and all the trees that were in the way had been cut down. Sway looked at it and said that it all looked unreliable. He asked Karen what they should do. The girl suggested throwing trash here. Sway thought about compost. He said that perhaps they could collect food waste and inedible parts of carcasses and use it as fertilizer. But would it work? Karen replied seriously and asked him to make one of the pits large and deep and cover the others with soil. Sway did not resist and went to do so. He had a lot of fun digging the ground. He finished digging and decided to leave it like that for now. Of course, he was still a long way from compost. Moreover, all the garbage would have to be moved to another place so that it wouldn't smell. And if he poured the blood of slaughtered animals into the pit, it would be like a sacrifice. Sway laughed and said he hoped they wouldn't summon any terrible monsters this way. After all, he was doing it for his own survival. Still, the guy hoped that the souls of the slaughtered animals would be able to reach nirvana. He folded his hands as if in prayer and closed his eyes. Karen saw this and asked what he was doing. The guy replied that he was praying, or rather reciting a spell, and that there was nothing strange about that. The girl came closer to him and asked what they should do now. The guy said they should make a table now, a place for tools when they get them. He wondered if there was a pulley in town. Karen replied that the Adventurers Guild probably used something like that when cutting up carcasses. Sway replied that he could handle it too, if necessary, and he suggested fencing off the area somehow. Karen firmly stated that the guy's magic would be very useful here. She asked him to just imagine that this was also part of his home, and a barrier would appear. But in order for Sway's imagination to work properly, Karen suggested actually building some kind of fence. Sway agreed with her. He replied that he was not yet confident enough to claim rights to the territory outside this house. If only he could move this fence. Karen replied that this would require good earth magic. Sway had dark magic. Karen had air and water magic. Chocola had light magic, but what about Viol? He was curious about this. The girl replied that Viol had water and fire magic, specifically flame and ice. Beast people understand earth magic, and some magical creatures use plant magic, which is a subtype of earth magic. Then Sway replied that there was nothing to be done about it, and that they couldn't make bricks that way. But Karen was sure that someday they would build something like that. In the meantime, she suggested improving Sway's magic level, because with it, he would be able to protect his beloved family, even when they were not around, and protect his home, even when he was far away. Sway realized that his father probably knew how to do something like that, and so they built a small fence out of branches. Sway said it looked unsightly, but at least it was something. They decided that the boy would expand his barrier somehow, so they didn't build anything else. And the boys realized that they needed more rope. After all, not everything can be solved with cheating skills. And Sway thinks that difficulties are more fun. He loves to make and create things. Back in Japan, the guy used to cook diligently for his father. But only now did Sway realize that it was his hobby. And not just cooking. Sway thought about it. He likes to chop wood, waiting to see what will grow from the seeds he planted. Everything related to the birth of something new. At school, Sway didn't dislike studying, but he didn't want to be an ordinary worker. The boy was happy to have entered university, but now it was too late to think about continuing his studies. Honestly, Sway admits that he doesn't regret ending up here. After all, now he can live peacefully protecting his family home, and he is ready to proudly tell his father that his son is alive and enjoying every day, that he inherited this precious home from his father. Sway told Karen that there would be no problems with the barrier, but he didn't know how to test it, and the girl replied that she would try to use magic now. Karen approached the house and stretched out her hand. Sway turned around. Suddenly, he saw something strange and large next to Karen. He called out to her "AT" that moment. There was a huge explosion. The guys jumped back and looked ahead. In front of them stood a monster that looked like a huge, ferocious eagle, with long feathers and scary massive horns. Karen's words about using magic were spinning around in Sway's head. For them, it was an unexpected guest. Sway looked at it fearfully and said that it looked like something out of a picture. He was surprised to see crystals on the monster's back. Karen said it was a mutant griffin. Sway realized that this one was just like the fake bear. Chocola barked viciously and was about to attack the griffin. It tried to climb over a small fence and attack the mutant. Karen and Sway stood behind him and watched in surprise. Sway wondered if they would be able to handle it. But then he remembered that his barrier should be able to withstand any attack. Karen said that if this barrier had withstood the attack of the mutant bear, then it would definitely withstand this attack, and the main thing was to believe in yourself. But be careful. The boy's face was a little worried. The girl warned him not to go outside the barrier when fighting the mutant, and after the battle as well. And Chocola had to do the same. The boy and the dog asked why. Karen replied that griffins usually hunt in packs. Although mutants can go out alone, it's not certain. Sway realized that this was so that while one distracted the mutant, the other could set up an ambush. Then they had to be careful and do everything to keep the barrier intact. Sway felt that Karen and Chocola trusted him too much. He was happy, of course, but he didn't like such responsibility. Suddenly, another mutant griffin flew in and tried to attack the house. But thank God the barrier held. The griffin was thrown back from the house with a crash and was unable to attack. One of the griffins shot flames at them from its huge beak, but the barrier withstood that too. Sway jokingly said that thanks to the barrier, they weren't even hot from the fire. Karen smiled and said that Sway's magic was just super. The guy smiled too, but replied that he and Chocola were really overestimating him. He explained that he was just worried, so he put up the barrier. The girl said that she could see the circulation of the guy's magic, so it was just a targeted raising of the shield. But it was unclear what to do next, because the mutant griffins weren't retreating. Karen said that griffins are always on the alert. Also, they usually retreat from their prey if they fail to kill them with the first strike. Furthermore, they do not have fire magic, only wind magic. Sway replied that the flames had hit them, but immediately suggested that this was because the griffin was a mutant. Yes, Karen confirmed this. Sometimes during mutation, monsters acquire unusual powers. Sway asked what to do. Karen replied that their only option was to kill the mutant griffins without leaving the barrier. However, her magic would not be very effective against them. Sway wanted to use the same techniques as with the false bear. That is to release a ball of dark magic and slow down the monster. But the girl wasn't sure it would work. Griffins are fast, so the guy wasn't sure either. And they set to work. Karen planned to use fog magic to block the griffin's visibility on the ground. Chocola was tasked with attacking the griffin above. Sway had to slow down the griffin on the ground. Karen reassured him that even if he missed his target, she would still be able to attack. They moved on cue. But suddenly, a quiet, soft, yet firm, and somehow soothing voice appeared next to Sway, saying that first a steel line of eternal sorrow was drawn. Then, just for a moment, the little finger dipped into gold. Mixing together, the blue and red dissipate, and the purple heavenly bell rings. Suddenly, a cloud of magic appeared in the air, and in it was a woman very familiar to Sway. She turned the griffins into huge crystals and blocked all action. Karen, Sway, and Chocola stood in surprise and watched what was happening. The woman descended to the ground, covering her face with her dark hat. She asked if Sway was hurt. Then she approached him, threw her hat into the air, and hugged him tightly. And hugged the guy tightly. It was Mrs. Viol. The woman whispered his name in a quiet voice. She sincerely apologized for not being there for him during difficult times, for not being there to support him as he grew up. She tearfully apologized for everything and continued to hold him tightly. Sway thought long and hard about what to say when he met his mother, but he still didn't understand what. Karen stood nearby, smiling and holding Viol's hat in her hands. But Sway looked at his mother, at her face. Finally remembered who he was. He was Hitano Sway, the child of Hitano Kazuduru and Viol Hitano. He was born into this world and into this house. The boy felt all his mother's warmth and sweetly congratulated her on her return, hugging her in return. After they finished hugging, Viol turned to Karen and said with a smile that she had come up with a good plan. They would definitely defeat the griffins. Viol apologized to Karen for taking her glory. Viol leaned over to Chocola and hugged him too. She noticed how much he had grown. She thanked him and apologized as well. The dog barked happily, and then the woman remembered that she had brought a lot of things for the kids. She was going to put all the goods in the garden. The children smiled broadly and were delighted. There was a huge backpack in the garden, bigger than they were. Sway was very surprised at how much his mother had carried. Viol explained that Karen had told her that they had few resources. They would look at what was in the backpack later. Sway asked his mother if she was tired. The journey was supposed to take 5 days, and now it was only the 4th. Although Karen had slept all day on the first day, Viol politely replied that she was fine, that it was nothing. Karen approached Sway quietly from behind and spoke to him. She said that his mother was strong, having defeated 2 griffins at once, and asked him not to worry about her. Karen was still far from her. Sway smiled and understood everything. He turned to his mother and said in a sad voice that he wanted to talk about his father. But Viol replied that Karen had already told her everything through the crystal. She apologized to her son for making him go through all this alone. Sway became sad. He realized that she was definitely his mother. She was just like his father. She put him first, even before herself. Viol asked Sway to show her the house. She wanted to see it because she hadn't been there for 13 years. They walked through the front door and found themselves in the hallway, and Mrs. Viol was immediately delighted. There was a vase on the side table. Viol said that they used to put flowers here that Sway and Karen grew themselves, the ones whose seeds they planted in the field as a joke. Sway smiled and said that yes, that was indeed the case. Although it was a joke, in the end, everyone was happy. They went into the kitchen. Viol was surprised that almost nothing had changed here. The woman asked if Sway remembered these curtains. When they played hide and seek, Karen hid behind them, although her feet were visible. Sway quickly found her then. Karen jokingly asked Ms. Viol to stop because she was already embarrassed. And now, in her opinion, she was much better at hide and seek. Chocola was nearby, barking happily. The boy petted Chocola and said that no matter how well Karen hid, his nose would still find her. The girl replied indignantly that it was unfair to use Chocola. Viol walked over to the stove and remembered that she had tried to cook here. But the flame of her magic was too strong. She laughed at this, but she never learned how to cook. She apologized to her son for not feeding him well. Sway replied that he had learned to cook instead. They had a fun time together. According to the boy, his father was also hopeless in the kitchen, so Sway became the head chef. Viol was delighted and offered to let Sway cook something for her. She asked her son if he knew how to use the food replenishment spell. The boy replied that he did, but he had only figured it out yesterday. Viol looked at the cupboards and guessed that they hadn't been restocked in a long time. There was canned food left in there. Mackerel fish. Viol said that in order to prevent the food from going to waste, she and her father had been eating it little by little. Sway thought that his father must have brought a lot of things from Japan. Suddenly, Karen exclaimed. She asked Ms. Viol to look at how smooth her hair was. She praised the Japanese shampoo that she and Sway had started using here. Viol agreed and said that yes, Karen's hair had been dull before. Sway said that they still had a lot of this shampoo, so they could continue using it without worry. Viol replied that this was wonderful news. Their father must have brought shampoo for both of them. Karen took out the shampoo for Chocola and said happily that they even had some for her. They approached the washing machine, and Viol covered her mouth with her hand in surprise. She was shocked that this thing also dried clothes after washing. She wanted to figure out how it all worked. Sway replied that you just had to press the buttons. He warned his mother that if she was afraid of breaking it, he could stand nearby. Viol took the boy's hands and thanked him. Suddenly, she remembered and asked about the locked room on the 2nd floor. The guy replied that yes, there was one. Viol knew it and smiled. She suggested looking at the room, since she had the key hanging around her neck. They went up to the 2nd floor. The woman asked her son if he remembered what kind of room it was. The guy replied that it was his and his father's room. They weren't allowed to play there, and they and Karen were constantly scolded when little Sway and Karen tried to sneak in. Otherwise, the door was simply locked. Sway thinks that, when you think about it, locking the couple's room is normal. They went inside. Viol noticed that nothing had changed. The woman saw a laptop on the table and asked her son if he knew what it was. Sway knew and answered. Viol said that this laptop was different from the one their father had used 13 years ago. Sway said that the old laptop was very old and that his father had replaced it a year or 2 ago. His mother suggested that he check out the laptop. Sway agreed, and so the 3 of them stood around the laptop, which had no password. They opened it and noticed 3 folders on the desktop. One of them was called Album, printed, and the second one was called Album, unprinted. Viol asked if anything had changed in the controls. Sway replied that everything was basically the same. She asked the guy to let her sit down at the laptop. Chocola also wanted to see and barked. On the screen, they found another folder called Family. It contained a video recorded by his father during his lifetime. All 4 of them were surprised when they saw it. Sway noticed that, judging by his father's appearance and hairstyle, the video had been recorded recently. Karen asked anxiously how old her uncle was when he died. The guy replied that his father was 41 years old, and he looked quite young for his age. Karen replied that this was because magic slows down aging. Sway said that he was often told that his father looked very young. His mother sat watching the screen. She quietly lowered her head. She pressed a button, and the video began to play. Everyone gathered heard the recording of the late Kazutoru's voice. He said Sway, and those who should be with him. Viol, Karen. If they're watching this, it means he is no longer alive. It may sound like a phrase from a manga, but if he were in their place, he would laugh now. And he definitely wouldn't let them watch this video to the end. He didn't know where to start, but he turned to Sway, and he started with what he needed to know. First, Kazutoru is human and was born in Japan. He ended up in another world 23 years ago, at the age of 18, when he had just graduated from school, together with the house where his deceased parents used to live. And yes, now this house belongs to Sway. Kazutoru's appearance in this world was attributed to a rift between the two worlds. Sway immediately realized that 18 years old was the same age he was now. They continued to listen to their father's voice. He moved to a place in the south of the kingdom of Sorks, near the city of Nurtep, right in the middle of a huge field. It caused a huge stir. He asked Sway if he remembered Nurtep. They often visited it with their family, and he asked him to go there again as soon as Sway remembered. But he didn't know where Sway would move with his house this time. If it was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, it would be difficult. So he scattered as many things as possible into boxes. And he said that the main thing was not to be a frozen prisoner of divine will. Karen and Sway laughed at that moment, because they had just moved here. But they realized that they were doing fine anyway and smiled. They continued listening. A lot happened in Nurtep, and in the kingdom itself. And then he met his mother, Viol. Their first meeting was awkward, and if he's interested, he can ask his mother. Viol jokingly replied that his father wasn't ashamed to mention it. After meeting, they began traveling. And very seriously, during this time, they picked up a puppy named Kushur, who had lost his parents, and received an elf baby as a memento from friend. That's Chocola and Karen. During their adventures, Viol and Chocola fell in love and got married. Sway was born. Viol, Chocola, Karen, and Sway became his big family in this world. Sway listened and felt how his father cherished not only him and Chocola, but also Viol and Karen, who were in this world at that time. His father asked him if he remembered what happened next. After his birth, they lived a fairly normal life. But due to unforeseen circumstances, Shu, Kazutoru, and Chocola returned to Japan. His father apologized for bringing them to Japan, but Sway was seriously ill, and he wanted to save him. So he opened a rift between the worlds and brought them back home. Karen wanted to clarify something, but Viol asked her to listen quietly. Sway's whole life flashed before his eyes. He didn't know that he was sick and that they wanted to save him. He didn't understand anything at that moment. An unexpected past was revealed to him. After that, he wanted to know everything about his father. To be continued. Thanks for watching. Write your feedback in the comments. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. See you soon.